I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the fairy realm and the fairies and your experience with them.
Mm.
And I was also wondering if you could talk about how we can use Reiki so that we can connect more with them and so they can see us and we can see them.
Yeah. For a background, if you're a new listener, my actual original training started in shamanism. And in core shamanism, we are trained in indigenous healing practices of people around the world. And my initial training is in not just, but one of the initial trainings that I began in my studies was in Celtic shamanism, both in the Lightsong School of Shamanic Studies with Jan Inglesmith and also with Tom Cowan, who is a Celtic shaman from New York, actually, but very amazing. And he has some great books on the subject, by the way, which we should put him on the podcast list. Yeah, so I haven't been in touch with him for a couple of years. But anyway, so part of that training in Celtic shamanism is working in the fairy realms. And so, probably like many of you, I grew up in the fantasy idea of what that meant in the fairy realms, and like it's a thing that children know, and then all the way through the garden fairies and all of that, and the mischievous fairies, to really learning how to connect in with them as they're a whole culture of beings that exist in a different realm, a different frequency of a realm. And so, to me, in my experience in learning how to meet them in that realm, to be able to communicate with them, um, I had to learn the skills and develop the abilities to make that connection. Part of what I had to heal to begin with was my belief system around it. And was that even true? Was it possible? I mean, I'm pretty aware of how it all sounds. I'm not like just naive that there are a lot of people going, what is she talking about? And then, probably don't even listen because they're like, whoa, okay. So anyway, I'm used to that now. It's been 20 some odd years, so I'm a little bit more used to it. I'll tell you what, I wrote an article early on about this called Reiki and Nature Spirits. I think it was like in 2005. And on the cover was Iris, who is she calls herself my fairy, she's not a, she's like a fairy grandmother, but not
Fairy
like a mom.
godmother?
No, she's a
I'm
grandmother,
kidding.
but like a grandmother energy in the fairy realms. So in that kind of a relationship, but not like my grandmother, not like an ancestral grandmother, but she is a grandmother energy. So anyway, I wrote about her in this article and the big picture on the cover of it, and of the article. And in fact, Robin, you're in that picture. And I'll tell you what, I was so uncomfortable writing it. It was called Reiki and Nature Spirits, and in it, I talk about how to connect with fairies and how to use Reiki to do that. And so I was so uncomfortable, but now I can talk about it because now I've had so many experiences to understand what those experiences, relationships, and connections are in the fairy realms. And in my own work and how I do my work, that is extensive. I've spent a lot of time working with the fairies. I've studied what is called fairy doctoring. So here's how it all works in a bigger picture. Let me kind of just settle into what I want to say about this. When you're doing this kind of work and going into spiritual energies or non physical energies, okay, let's see, wait a minute. There are many different spiritual realms and non physical realms that exist. And when we are doing this kind of work, like shamanic work or Reiki work, part of what we are doing is deciding what is the energy that we're working with, where is it coming from, what is its level of consciousness, do we want to be working with that energy, and how do we access the energy, and how do we deliver it, how do we utilize it. So those are all the things that are happening when you are doing shamanic studies, when you're doing Reiki studies. That's the whole thing, is where is the energy coming from? What is it? How are you accessing it? What's its consciousness? And if you are working in the realms where you are perceiving non-physical beings, it's the same thing. Who are the non-physical beings that you're talking to? What is the realm they live in? What is their level of consciousness? Do you want to be connected to them? Are they who you are using to do your healing work? And if so, how are you accessing them and how are you delivering that energy? So that's what the training involves. That's what my years of training involve. Understanding the energies that I'm working with and the spiritual beings that I'm working with, where they come from, what they are, and do I want to work with them? Is that, and is that how I'm going to do my healing work in my actual sessions? So in accessing the fairy realms, understanding that they do exist, and they are a culture that is different than ours, and they also have a different divine purpose than we do. And so when you're connecting with them, you also want to make sure that you are connecting with ones that are um, higher consciousness beings. They live, they're a what we would call in this kind of idea of these things, a second heaven being, where there are some with higher consciousness and some with lower consciousness, just like like in the dual realms, because it's a dual realm. So anyway, you're finding out who do you want to connect with, and what is their consciousness, and what do you want to do about that? What do you want to do with that information or that connection? There's, a lot of value in simply like getting to go to, like a line of trees, for instance. You can go into right at that betwixt and between time, right as the sun is coming up, or right before it, or a little bit after, and right as the sun is setting, and then in the moonlight a lot of times. And you can run your hands kind of along those bushes, and you'll see little like sparks of light coming off. Um, but that's just one experience of them. You can also have relationships with them if you are working in, your garden things that you're doing. But from a shamanic perspective and a Reiki perspective, what I have with my relationship with the fairy realms is that now they are um, beings that I connect to, I can connect to. However, when I'm doing my healing work, I'm still always working with Reiki energy to do that, because I found that it was a higher source of the healing energy. And by higher, I don't want to give it a hierarchical meaning like better than. It's just a different energy in the way that it does its healing work. And so for me, that ended up my preference in the energies that I want to connect to. Where are they coming from and what are their consciousness when I'm doing my healing work? We have a lot of forests here, and we hike in the forest a lot. And right where I live, there are many places that I can go and have that connection in the fairy realms. You can also have a connection with it psychically. You don't have to physically be next to it. And then I've also had very direct experiences with them in Ireland, in the training that I went to there, and again with Tom Cowan, and in the fairy doctoring teachings and trainings that I did. I have still always worked with Reiki in all of my work. And so what I've found is many of you may already be working in other traditions and other realms. And when you combine it with Reiki, it's really going to take you into the higher consciousness realms of those practices, because Reiki is always going into the higher consciousness realms. It's always coming from enlightened realms. And it's one of the reasons I really like teaching it, although, I'm still involved in all my shamanic work as well. Um, but one of the reasons I really love teaching Reiki is that the attunement that you receive to Reiki is what assures that when you are activating Reiki within yourself or giving it to somebody else, that the pure energy of Reiki is what's actually coming through you. So I like that part of it. Shamanic training takes a lot of years to become really skilled in. And you can imagine why, because you're doing things like going hanging out in the fairy realms. And, I can travel over to Ireland in this moment in my, my genetic memory is really activated there, but also, from my training, and be connected into those realms. And then, Maureen, to answer your question about how do we activate the light within us. So if you are physically wanting an engagement in the fairy realms, they can't see us any more than we can see them. And not all of them want to see us. Same thing. Just like, here, not everybody wants to go check out the fairy realms. And in that realm, they don't all want to perceive us either, but there are some that do. But they are the ones, what you want to ask for are the compassionate ones that are working together, contributing to the wellness of the world. I also don't see the judgment from them that a lot of people assign to them about us. And so that's another piece of it that I would add to this. Um, so anyway, if you want to physically meet with them or perceive them in the physical realms, the best advice I can give you is that you need to light your light so they can see you. It's not all about you seeing them. It's about you shining your light within so they can see you. And I use Reiki to do that. The distance symbol not always goes everywhere else. The distance symbol also goes inside. So, um, in my imagination, I think of the distance symbol as a bridge of light. And so it's, to me, it's like a literal bridge. So if I want to go, let's say, journey into the fairy realms, I can activate all the Reiki symbols and use the distance symbol to walk over that bridge to get there. And you can walk over that bridge and you can go to the same place. For those of you that are familiar with some of the holy fire realms, like the River of Life or the Ocean of Holy Love, any of those things, the banquet hall, you can travel over that bridge into those same realms and ask telepathically to meet with the higher consciousness fairy beings that would want to work to contribute to the wellness. So I always activate Reiki because I know that Reiki is going to take me into the higher consciousness realms. But I also, now going back to the physical idea of meeting with them, using that distance symbol and imagining that same bridge of light going from here in your personality, and putting my hand in front for those that are listening and not seeing, going from, the my personality and that bridge of light, I actually picture myself walking over it inward, deeper and deeper and deeper into my higher consciousness, where that light exists and it's not covered by the ways and worries of the world. The light exists, that same one I talked about earlier that unifies us, that light that exists within us. And so that distance symbol and all the others can help us walk into our higher self and higher consciousness, light our light, and then go and open your eyes and look into it. The times that they are present, that I find they are mostly present, is the betwixt and between. And that is the time, of sunlight, sunrise, sunset, dusk, right afterwards, sometimes in that full moonlight, sometimes in the dark of the night when the crescent moon. So it's a fun practice, and you can ask to meet the ones that want to meet you, that are higher consciousness. One of the terms you can use that is helpful in helping them identify who you're asking to meet is by asking to meet compassionate beings, so that they have an awareness, that they have an interest. You have an awareness, they have an interest in working together to contribute to the wellness of the world. The other thing I will tell you about them, though, is they do have different etiquette than we have. So sometimes some of the things that we think of as mischievous, for them is a gift. So be careful of your own interpretations in your engagement with them, and ask them. Don't assume that they're thinking the way you think. They have a whole different perception than we have. So sometimes you'll just see things that you're like, okay, I don't understand that. And our interpretation sees it one way. Be sure you ask, like, what did that mean?